Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know when you're watching this video. I hope you're ready to answer the priming question. What, after all, is media effects? In this video, I hope to answer that question for you guys. I'll divide this video into a couple of parts, but first, I want to just briefly give you an overview of media effects history, research goals, methodologies, and what people usually do with media effects. Then I want to highlight two aspects or two types of media effects, micro-level effects and macro-level effects, because those two are very well connected to uses and gratification research and agenda setting research that is the main theme of these weeks. So let's get going. Last week, I mentioned how the study of audiences was closely linked to the field of media effects. In fact, the way that we perceive the audience from an academic perspective or an academic point of view is not that far off on how we approach communication and media studies. So those two kind of evolve together. Parallel to the idea of a very passive audience, there is also the idea of an all-powerful media, right? Represented by the theories of the hypodermic needle or the magic bullet. But what about, more specifically, media effects? Why did people start worrying about it? We can trace it back to a few points in media history that might be connected to it. For instance, early studies about war propaganda or early concerns about war propaganda could be connected to our first interest in understanding media effects. Because, of course, we wanted to ask what are the effects of war propaganda on people, both, let's say, on the side of the Americans and like the strong US Uncle Sam guy, but also on the side of the Nazis. And the Nazi propaganda was very well known for being quite effective in spreading Nazi ideology. We can also think about it from the entertainment perspective with one of the very first big mass media entertainment options that was cinema. Understanding why audiences go to cinema, or then what are the effects of watching a movie on people. Now, definitely one of the most important studies that ever happened for media studies and media effects studies is the People's Choice. The People's Choice was a study conducted back in the 40s by Paul Lazarsfeld, Bernard Beruson, and Hazel Godet. In this study, they first realized that media had very limited effects on people. So they wanted to understand voting behavior. Why do people vote and support certain candidates? As we know, as I mentioned before, the first idea we had about media is that the message, whichever was it, would be injected into people via a needle or via a magic bullet. That was the logic behind it. But the People's Choice research showed, well, things were not really like that. There were very limited effects of media exposure to voting behavior. And in a study after that, known as the Decatur study, Elihu Katz and Paul Lazarsfeld noticed the importance of personal influence in the processes of mass communication. It's what we now know as the two-step flow of influence, where the media message, instead of going directly to people, is actually filtered first by people that are part of your circles. We call them opinion leaders. Nowadays, we can call them influencers, YouTubers, Instagrammers, and etc., or news pundits. So these people also play a major role in the flow of mass communication. This theory of the two-step flow of communication really changed how we perceive both the media influence on people and how we see and study media audiences. By now, you might be asking yourselves, what then is media effects? Potter, not Harry, but James, has the simple yet very good definition. Media influenced effects are those things that occur as a result, either in part or in whole, from media influence. What the author highlights here is really important. Media influence can generate effects that are partial, and indeed, that seems to be the case most of the time. It is very difficult to pinpoint an exact effect for, let's say, the consumption of sexual content in media that is related solely to media being consumed. Chances are that other factors do come into play into the effects of, say, consuming sexual content in media. It might also be related to matters of patriarchy, of gender imbalance in certain societies, cultural backgrounds, and so on and so forth. And what are these things that Potter mentions? Well, there's a very long list of possibilities, and you see there, and this is just half of the table, you can see agenda setting at the top and some other names that you may be somewhat familiar with. You might have seen it elsewhere. For example, the idea of media enjoyment, media framing, civic engagement. The list is extensive. And if you take your time to engage with media effects, you see that these concepts, theories, effects, they can and are tested using a range of quantitative methods applied to media effects methodologies. These are some of the most common ones in the field. Of course, nowadays we have also some mixed methods happening, but it's still mostly quantitative research based on measurements and statistics. And some of the methodologies include content analysis of quantitative nature, although qualitative is also possible, controlled experiments, surveys, neurocognitive analysis. So there is also this joint research with people from psychology field or medical fields and etc. Naturalistic observation, which is then observing the usage of media in its natural space, and meta-analysis of bigger, larger studies or several studies, let's say about media violence, and then you conduct a meta-analysis of those findings to see what are the patterns, what are the answers that are being found, or what are the controversies still going on. So these are just, of course, some of the methods. There are more ways of doing media effects research. Okay, so we saw what media effects are and what are some ways to do media effects research. But what do you do with it? Well, what do media scholars look for at the end of the day? Potter highlights 8 key aspects that concern media effects research. The first one is timing. For example, how much time do we expend consuming media per day? The second, duration of the effects. Are the media effects temporary or are they long-lasting? We also check the valence of these effects. Are they positive effects, negative effects? Change is particularly interesting for media effects researchers. They are interested in answering questions related to attitudinal, behavioral, and cognitive changes due to media consumption. We can also check the intention. For example, what is the intent of the message creator and whether that intent is converted into the desired effect upon the audience. Media effects scholar also checks for the manifestation of these effects. Are these effects being clearly manifested or is the manifestation latent, difficult to observe? We can also realize whether effects are direct or indirect. And lastly, we can look at the level of these effects in 2 ways, whether they happen on a micro or on a macro level. Sparks also highlights some themes that are of interest to media effects scholars. For instance, they can be concerned about the impact of new media technologies that can be related to the timing. So how much time do we spend on our mobile phones? It can be related to media and violence, which is one of the biggest topics of interest in media effects research. Or the persuasive effects of media, and then we're thinking about propaganda, about advertisement. We can think about how media perpetuates certain stereotypes or creates certain stereotypes, and then how that information is primed into people. We can also research media and emotion. So which feelings do we have from watching a movie? Do we get sad? Do we cry? Do we feel joy? Do we feel relaxation? We can also study the effects of sexual content in media, very common in video game studies, for example, that we look at the sexualization of female bodies in video games especially, and what are the effects of that in female gamers and also male gamers. Media and politics, another big field, especially in the realm of polls, elections, and public opinion. And lastly, Sparks also highlights the idea of micro and macro level effects, which is our next topic of today. Micro-level effects are those concerned about effects of media consumption on individuals. Potter will argue that there are 6 types of effects on individuals. Cognitive effects, so they change our cognition, beliefs, attitudes, affective effects, physiological effects, and behavioral effects. Parallel to that, Potter argues that media has then 4 functions: acquiring, triggering, altering, and reinforcing. Acquiring and triggering are more immediate effects according to Potter. They happen as soon as we get in touch with the media. So for example, in acquiring, we acquire information, or we acquire a memory or something that is then connected to our exposure to that message. For example, a memory of watching something can last just a few seconds, a few minutes, a few days, or even a few years. Media exposures can also be triggering, and we see that a lot nowadays with, for example, trigger warnings for sensitive content, because media can have this triggering effect on people, and this triggering effect can be quite immediate. According to media effects approaches, media also has the altering function. So it can alter our behavior, it can alter our beliefs based, say, on exposure to certain advertisements. Similar to that, it can also reinforce patterns of behavior. For example, constant messages about usage of masks can reinforce that, well, we should be wearing masks outside. Uses and gratifications can also be used in micro-level effects research, because we're looking at how people use media according to the needs they have and what is the gratification they take from it. So in many ways, it is very connected to a micro-level effect of media. And now you've been waiting for some funny sketch by now, and I definitely am not letting you down.
The Haikyuu experiment. Day 1. Subject code name, Barker Sensei. Subject is ready. Subject sits in front of computer and looks relaxed. He yawns and seems bored. Day 2. Subject Barker Sensei. Subject still wearing same t-shirt. Proper otaku. Hopefully showered. Binged a whole season. Seems more engaged with anime. Day 5. Subject Barker Sensei. Subject has changed clothes. Subject has binged season 2 as well. Subject has acquired anime merchandise indicating a deeply affection to its characters. Day 30. Subject Barker Sensei. After waiting a month for the access to new season, subject seemed to have developed a keen liking of character Tsukishima, number 11. Subject also reports starting to add jump training to his exercise routine. Day 35. Subject Barker Sensei. Subject shows higher excitement with the show. Day 60. Subject Barker Sensei. Subject knows anime lines by heart and practices volleyball while watching it. Subject increases his jump training. Day 75. Subject Barker Sensei. Subject seems to have achieved its final form and joined a volleyball team. Subject reports that anime changed his life for the best. Subject is 100% otaku and a volleyball geek now. Experiment successful.
To what extent watching the anime Haikyuu leads to increased motivation to play volleyball? As far as I know, no research about it has been done yet. Definitely a good topic to think about though. But anecdotal evidence, the one that I gather by being a fan of it and participating in fan communities of Haikyuu, indicate that there might be a positive correlation. People that watch Haikyuu tend to then start playing volleyball. In this case, we would be talking about micro-level effects, thinking, for example, about attitude change towards sports and towards volleyball in specific, or how affective connection to a cultural product can alter our behavior, or if watching one episode of Haikyuu may alter one's mood. All these hypotheses, they can be empirically tested. Another kind of research I could do to measure this correlation or to understand this correlation is through uses and gratification research. Setting a survey, for example, on the Haikyuu Reddit page to collect extensive quantitative data. And then I could even conduct some interviews to gather in-depth qualitative data, resulting in a mixed method study that can give a lot of insight into to what extent watching a volleyball anime leads people to play more volleyball. What about macro-level effects? They are those concerned about the effects of media consumption on a larger group or larger communities. You can even think of a town, a neighborhood, a nation, an ethnic group, and etc. Macro-level effects, according to Sparks, they can be also related to media monopoly and selective exposure to news. So by having more people controlling the media, then you have certain communities that will be receiving the same kind of news all the time, and that can be problematic. And the problem happens because, according to media effects researcher Porter, media can influence the public, can influence institutions, and even the media themselves by setting their own agenda, for example. So in this regard, agenda setting can be a media effect with macro level characteristics. So let's think a little bit more about that. This can be related, for example, to the many public opinion surveys conducted worldwide on a variety of topics, or the different media outlets that say different things about, let's say, vaccination. A lot of political science research on public opinion stems from a media perspective, media effects perspective, and indeed is preoccupied with how public opinion is formed, what are the effects that exposition to media content and maybe to partisan media content, to biased media content, can cause in different audiences. Public opinion surveys on controversial topics such as abortion, vaccination, or religion can help, for instance, institutions and political candidates to tailor their message to their audience. And agenda setting would be a theory that helps in this regard. The more the media talks about something while leaving other topics to the side, the higher are the chances that people will also start talking about it on their daily lives. Let's say a media channel takes a anti-vaccine stance and has a constant flow of content that reinforces this message. Chances are that their audience, or those that remain loyal viewers of the channel, loyal consumers of that content, will share similar views on the matter. Think about what's going on right now with the COVID-19 and vaccination. There is a constant battle of discourses on the media. Should we trust the new vaccines? Should we not trust the new vaccines? Should we trust science or not trust science? Therefore, society is constantly talking about it as well. Media, in this case, as mentioned in McWhale's paper on agenda setting, works in forming, priming, and shaping the opinions of the audience. It does not mean that we passively accept whatever the media is saying, because the media doesn't really tell us what to think about any topic. Rather, the media invites us to talk about it, but sometimes the media invites us to talk about it in a very forced way by just hammering on the topic day after day and leaving other important topics to the side. So by selecting which news they show to us, they set the agenda of public conversation. And right now, the public conversation is all about COVID-19. And this is it for our Media Effects video lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any further questions about media effects, you can ask me during our seminar this week. Also, you can check the references above. They are all very good and can really help you understand what media effects is all about. See you very soon. Bye bye.